Welcome to the Common Man Football Show. My name is James Cobern, and today's episode, this is a question submitted by Tristan Skorzewski. I probably said that wrong. I apologize if I do. Said, could you do Marcus Peters? I'm sure production and explosiveness would be solid, but not sure about the rest. And yeah, we can do Marcus Peters. Marcus Peters, of course, cornerback from the Kansas City Chiefs. I believe he was Defensive Rookie of the Year one year. I think so. If I'm wrong, just tell me in the comment section. But yeah, he's a very productive cornerback from Kansas City Chiefs. In the draft class in particular, a lot of the question marks with him were centered around character stuff because of when he was on the Washington Huskies. There was a lot of sort of talk about him being a bit of like a Percy Harvin. There was a lot of like rumors about him, butting heads with coaching staffs and stuff like that at that program. In the draft process, a lot of that stuff kind of decreased a bit, but he still ended up having that sort of, glow around him. But the bottom line is I think he's a good prospect, and I think he's also a good prospect to look at because, cornerback data is very wishy-washy at times in terms of its makeup and how it works and stuff like that. Like, it's very clear that, the data is very clear on the fact that you need to be an amazing athlete and have really good production to be like a multiple all-pro type. Where it's not so clear on is what it takes to be that second-tier type of cornerback, that guy that's really, really productive, doesn't maintain that dominance long term, but does at least have like a spurt of like 3 amazing games, like an Asante Samuel type, or those other sort of cornerbacks that don't really get the recognition that they maybe deserve, and do have interesting stuff on paper. It's just that they don't have like the Darrelle Revis or Nnamdi Asomugha or Patrick Peterson sort of stuff on paper. They're kind of in the midsection a bit when it comes to their overall sort of data profile. I think Marcus Peters is a good place to kind of examine and kind of explore that question. So again, if you're not familiar with the data work that I do, I'm going to leave the terms I'm going to be discussing, I'm going to leave in the description, terms like defensive market share, athleticism data in terms of explosiveness, speed, and flexibility. I'm going to leave in the description the terms and the definition. So if you're not familiar with anything that I'm talking about right now, you can just check that description area. If you still need me to explain more about that stuff, you can go to any one of the videos I've done in the past on the subject of cornerbacks or defensive players in general, where I kind of explain in a little bit more detail about all that kind of stuff. But the bottom line is you can check all that stuff in the description. If you can't really do that, then just check out one of my older videos. And if you can't do that, just leave a comment if you have questions and stuff. So with all that stuff out of the way, let's get to Marcus Peters in terms of what he looked like coming out of college in terms of production, and also what he looked like as an athlete coming out, and what his NFL production looks like as well. So looking at Marcus Peters in terms of his production coming out of college, this is him looking at his bottom threshold in terms of solo tackle market share, pass selection market share, the average solo tackle market share score of all pro and Pro Bowl players, and the average pass deflection market share score for all pro and Pro Bowl players. When you look at Marcus Peters, he had a 59.05 solo tackle market share score and an 83.02 pass deflection market share score. Based on his data, his data matches up more so with Pro Bowl potential guys than all pro potential guys, mainly because his solo tackle market share is more indicative of the averages at the Pro Bowl position than the averages at the All-Pro position. He's only about 1 point away from the bottom end threshold for solo tackle market share, but the more important thing is actually his pass deflection market share, where he's at 83.02, which, as you can see, is above that threshold and above the average pass deflection market share threshold for All-Pro players. So coming out of college, Marcus Peters pretty much looked like a potential Pro Bowl cornerback based on his data, with some All-Pro potential as well, because his solo tackle market share was so close to the All-Pro bottom end threshold that it's within the possibility, it's within the range of possibilities that he could end up being an outlier. And again, this data is from the 1989 NFL draft class, so that's a lot of cornerbacks I'm covering. But the bottom line is it's within the realm of possibility that being 1 point off from the threshold, around 1 point off, is not the biggest deal in the world when it comes to analytics because of the margin of error between those 2 points and lots of different sort of stuff. But the bottom line is Marcus Peters, based on his production market share data stuff, looks like a potential Pro Bowl to All-Pro outlier type, just based on his solo tackle market share. Like he may have redefined what that threshold is if he became a multiple All-Pro type. Where his real issues really showed up was just in his athleticism. He had a 76.33 explosive lower body strength score, a 52.47 speed score, and a 63.31 flexibility score. Based on my data as well, all multiple All-Pro types have 76.02 in terms of explosiveness, 88.25 in terms of speed, and 76.41 in terms of flexibility, with the exception of Richard Sherman, who basically had a identical speed score as Marcus Peters in a way. Like he had average speed at the position compared to all the other cornerbacks since 1999 in terms of athleticism data. So Marcus Peters, in many ways, his athleticism data matched up more so with Pro Bowl players. If you look at the Pro Bowl thresholds, he didn't hit the speed Pro Bowl threshold, but he did hit the flexibility and explosiveness threshold. And again, in many ways, his speed score is very similar to Richard Sherman from that kind of perspective. In fact, this is Richard Sherman's athleticism profile. This is Marcus Peters in terms of his athleticism profile. Just to kind of throw this out there again, there's not very many outliers. Richard Sherman is the only real sort of outlier when it comes to his athleticism data. Sherman had other things pointing towards success in terms of just his size and length and also his production coming out. But in many ways, Marcus Peters would have to become sort of an outlier if he was to become a multiple Pro Bowl, multiple All-Pro type. He looks like he's on the path to become a multiple Pro Bowl type. But it's just that the thresholds have been this way for a while in terms that you need a certain amount of speed, you need a certain amount of flexibility to get this sort of stuff. But as I already showed you, his production pretty much passed everything that you want at the position for the most part. So his production was fine. His explosiveness was good. I mean, that was one of the main positives, is that his explosive lower body strength score is 76.33 is pretty dang good. His flexibility hits at least the Pro Bowl threshold. His speed isn't the best, but again, I don't think it's the biggest deal in the world. It really depends on the scheme that you're running, because I see this a lot with cornerbacks where, if you're a man cornerback, if you're a Darrelle Revis, if you are a Nnamdi Asomugha, if you are a man corner and your primary responsibility is to run with every top number one wide receiver, you need to have speed. I don't care what people say. I don't care, whatever you're saying. If you're in a scheme where you need to run step for step with someone, you better have speed. And if you don't believe me, then just look at how well Richard Sherman does when he goes up against T.Y. Hilton or any other sort of short speed wide receiver. He doesn't do well against those types of guys because, athletically speaking, he just can't run with those types of guys. He can definitely beat them up. He can punch them in the face. He can kick them. He can use his size against them to get leverage in terms of short area-ness of it all. But if you ask him to run stride for stride with a guy who runs 4.3, that ain't going to work out so well unless you have really good safety help. So in many ways, cornerback athleticism speaks to what type of scheme they need to be in order to thrive as a player. And Marcus Peters is, in terms of his athleticism data, he has a data profile of a zone cornerback. He has really good explosiveness. He has at least above average flexibility testing, and he doesn't have the best speed, but he's going to thrive in a zone scheme. If you ask him to cover guys within a certain area, cover guys within a 10 to 15 yards sort of thing, and you ask him to kind of roam around and ball hawk and do that kind of thing, he's going to be really good at that. He's going to be, Richard Sherman-ish at that sort of stuff. But if you ask him that, hey, I need you to run stride for stride with this 4-3 wide receiver, he's not going to do so well, especially in the open field, where we're not talking about a condensed area of the field, like if Marcus Peters was playing a short, fast wide receiver in the red zone, he would fare a lot better than if he was facing that short, wide receiver in the slot. So that's really all I can say about Marcus Peters in terms of athleticism data. Is that he did have a couple things that weren't the best. His speed score in particular didn't really hit the sort of threshold for where the majority of All-Pro and Pro Bowl players end up. Because again, this is more so about 95% of multiple All-Pro and Pro Bowl types hit these thresholds when it comes to their athleticism data. But the bottom line is I think there was enough stuff on paper with Marcus Peters to say that he had the production data that you were looking for. He had questions in terms of athleticism data, but it's really more so about the type of scheme that you're running. If you're a zone team, Marcus Peters is the type of guy that you want at cornerback. Because if you're trying to run a scheme where you have him and you want him to kind of defend a certain area of the field, like a certain side of the field, he'll do really well with that. But again, if you ask him to cover a guy in space who runs 4-3 without help, I mean, there's not much I can do for you. So that's something I could say is that Marcus Peters definitely has a lot of positives, but he does have some glaring weaknesses that can be a liability if he's put into a situation like I described, where you're putting him in the slot and you're asking him to cover like a T.Y. Hilton or a guy who runs 4-3. Lots of stuff could happen. He can't run stride for stride with that type of guy. As much as people say, oh, that's not how it works, well, yeah, it is, because we've seen it with other cornerbacks in the past. When they face these types of guys, they have issues. Even Xavier Rhodes, because people always go, oh, Xavier Rhodes shut down Odell Beckham Jr. Well, in a way, he shut him down on his side of the football field, because, again, they're giving Rhodes 15 yards and having him cover 15 yards, and as long as Odell Beckham Jr. is in that 15 to 10 yard area, you can shut him down. If he gets past that 15 to 10 yard area, then you're not catching him. So I just think that, again, the scheme is so important at any position, especially cornerback. And all I'm really trying to say is Marcus Peters, in terms of his athleticism profile, looked more like a zone corner who could potentially be a multiple All-Pro, multiple Pro Bowl outlier if he goes to a zone scheme. And so far, his career has been very good in terms of production. At the NFL level, when it comes to solo tackle market share, interception market share, and pass deflection market share, in 2015 he had the best impact of any cornerback that year in terms of solo tackle market share, interception market share, and pass deflection market share. All those marks right there are elite. In 2016, he had a dip in terms of his solo tackle market share, only had a 67.17 score, but had a 98.01 interception market share score and 94.04 pass deflection market share score, with a total impact score of 92.06, which is essentially like a top 10 cornerback impact score. So Marcus Peters went to a scheme in Kansas City that is trying to be Seahawk-ish. I mean, I'm just going to be honest. I mean, they're trying to be Seahawk-ish in terms of their approach on defense, and Marcus Peters has thrived in that system, which goes back to the fact that, if you're going to get a cornerback who does a certain amount of things really well, like Marcus Peters, then you put him in the right scheme and he's going to flourish, which is like most players. However, you do have to understand some of the limits to what you're asking to do, because I guess what it really comes down to is, what are you asking of your players, and do you want versatility, or do you want a very specific player? Because there's lots of football teams who just go after great talent. They go after the guy who has like a 90 percentile plus athleticism rating and all that kind of stuff. And those are teams that, unfortunately, you only have so many athletes that are 90 plus percentile athletes. Like, there's only so many of those guys, so you have to start to think outside the box when it comes to your evaluations, because you're just not going to get that type of guy all the time. And especially a great athlete who's also a great football player, because that also kind of gets lost in the sauce as well. However, you can find guys like Marcus Peters who don't have the greatest athleticism overall, but they do have good production. They are a good football player. And if you put him in a certain type of scheme that asks him to do certain things and limits some of the things that he doesn't do so well in terms of speed, then you can get a lot of positive effects. And I think this is the best example of that. That when you put a corner like this in this particular scheme, you ask him to be a ball hawk, you ask him to disrupt the pass, you ask him to do all that kind of stuff. You don't ask him to do stuff like follow stride for stride, a 4-3-4-4 wide receiver, and he's going to have lots of success doing that. And I think that's the biggest sort of takeaway with Marcus Peters, is that you need to really have a good idea about the type of athlete that you're getting to the quarterback position and also the type of scheme that you're running. And if you have a good grasp of both those things, then you can have lots of success. And I think that's a good example of what Marcus Peters is he's a guy who got to the right scheme, has had lots of positives on paper with him, and ultimately it all just worked out in Kansas City. So again, my name is James Cobern. You can find my work at draftcoburn.wordpress.com. You can also follow me on Twitter at Geometrics. And if you like this content and you want more content like this, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. Share this video as well with anybody that you know, and I'll talk to you guys in the next video. Peace.